I used to know this homeless lady who called herself the bishop. She was sent from God to get you to repent. r/AskReddit. Who is the most delusional person you have met? I once met someone who was convinced that he was a werewolf. I thought he was kidding until he started hardcore trying to get me to agree that he was a werewolf. Years later I ran into him and he was going on about how good weed smells like flowers. Edit. That's actually tied with someone I met who thought he was a psychic vampire who could also control animals to some degree. One of my wife's best friends from childhood got pregnant their senior year of college in 2013. I'll call her Jane. Jane lived with her boyfriend after the baby was born. They did both have jobs, but were living in a dicey area, on government assistance, receiving food stamps, etc. No judgment, just painting a picture. About a year after baby was born, 2014, Jane breaks up with her boyfriend and immediately moves back in with her parents. She has continued to live there, rent-free, for the past 5 to 6 years. Last year, Jane's younger sister unexpectedly got pregnant at almost the exact same age Jane was 7 years ago, and Jane freaked out. Between social media posts and actual conversations I've heard, it's a constant barrage of what kind of person gets pregnant when they aren't mature enough to be a parent? How are you going to afford this baby? My sister is terrible with money and she can't live with us forever, etc. I should also note that Jane considers herself a #BOSSBABE and therefore more mature than her sister, I guess, largely because of her participation in a multi-level marketing scheme that has earned her no money, but she posts almost daily on social media about her busy life as a small business owner. TL. Doctor unwed mother with little to no professional skills, berates sister for being exactly like her, is blissfully unaware of the irony. I'm a receptionist at a community center, so I meet a lot of characters. My very first day, I met a lady, trans, this is important. She zones in on me, she starts telling me that she is the empress of the world. She is worth trillions of dollars. She has 241 children who live in another dimension. She is waiting on a male celebrity singer to come and get her. She was once shot in the middle of her eyes in an apparent execution attempt on male singer. I stood there in shock. Over time, I start realizing that she is incredibly well versed in history. If life had been kinder, she could have been a history professor. I actually begin to enjoy our conversations. Then she starts calling me on my extension. Tells me to quit my job, work for her. I would stand to make $1 million a week. Then she says she is actually my mother and I'm a princess. Then I start realizing she is incredibly homophobic and very racist, as she told me out of nowhere, I might add, that I could not date black men. She is escorted out, but this does not deter her. Then quarantine came into effect. I'm told she shows up and calls looking for me, convinced I have the Rona and she needs to protect me. My ex, she is on the spectrum, but very high functioning. You couldn't really tell unless you spent a long time with her, which is why my dumbass ended up with her in the first place. Anyway, she was for some inane reason eligible for rehabilitation jobs despite being nearly normally functioning, which was given to her by the municipality. She would put other people down for their actual real jobs and she didn't understand how anyone can think it's difficult to work and how they struggle to juggle both work and home, or how they can't find jobs, etc. Because she refused to believe that the real world was any different than her world. In her mind she has it just as difficult as everyone else and everyone else are just lazy whiners. She would die on that hill. Her world. 4 hours per day, 1 hour lunch, 3 days a week, and get fully paid. If you don't feel like showing up, you don't have to, you still get paid, and they can't fire you. If Monday is particularly difficult, you just call and say messy BA and that's that. You don't even have to be competent at the job you're doing to keep it. You're not there to work. You're there to be rehabilitated. If you somehow manage to fuck this up, the municipality will literally give you a new job on the spot. You don't need to write a CV. You don't need to compete with other applicants and you don't even have to go on an interview. You just get handed a new rehabilitation job and show up the next day, unless you can't be asked, that's fine too. She thinks this is how the real world works. I'm so happy that in 2 years she will be 30 years old and she will no longer be eligible for these rehabilitation jobs. Then she has to do what everyone else does to get and keep a job. She's a massive cunt of a person, very abusive, her soul is dog shit, and every single fucking thing about her is ugly. So you can only imagine how glad it makes me that the real world will soon come smacking her across the face with the force of a billion suns. I don't have to be a cunt to her, the world will do this for me in a few years. It makes me really happy. My mother abused the absolute hell out of me and my sister. Physically, emotionally, you name it. Life with her was non-stop torture. CPS finally took our complaints seriously and we were removed from the home when we were around 15. I have been no contact since I was 16, but my sister tried to keep things civil between them until last year. One day my sister called me out of the blue in absolute hysterics. My mother apparently is completely convinced none of the abuses happened and that my sister is evil and has somehow turned me against her. She had been gaslighting my sister so badly that she had to call me just to reconfirm all the abuse had actually taken place. Silver lining, this was the event that finally convinced her to go no contact. I have no idea how someone can do such horrendous things for such a long period of time and just have no memory of it. She has a very extreme case of BPD, and we suspect also bipolar too because it runs in her family and she certainly displayed symptoms. She was abusing her Adderall, which is a big no-no for most people with bipolar disorder, and Xanax prescription by the end of it when the abuse got really bad, but that doesn't really excuse her for getting over a decade of awful. The craziest part is, she is extremely intelligent. She has a PhD and is well respected amongst her peers. I check her LinkedIn occasionally just to keep up on where she's living, and she is currently working in cancer research. No idea how she manages to pull it off. I had moved to a new area and started in a new high school, and at one point this obnoxious kid, Joe, who everyone avoided, sat next to me and started spewing bullshit. He told this story that spanned from being groomed for the Mafia to being an honorary officer of the local PD. Talked about all these guns he owns, and I know guns. He was talking about thousands and thousands of dollars worth of hardware all these fights had been in where at the last minute he decided not to kill the guy, and on and on and on. I didn't even get a word in besides O or MHM, and he talked at me about all this shit for an entire study hall period, like 45 minutes. Before the bell rang I asked, do you hear yourself when you talk, or just launch into a river of dumb bullshit every time? The teacher heard me swear and brought me into the hall to chastise me. Instead we had a laugh because he had been listening to Joe's mouth for the whole year. I transferred part way through and was sick of it. Right before the end of the year Joe decided to play policeman and got another kid in trouble for selling weed. Joe promptly got his ass kicked, and it was all anyone on MySpace. This was a while ago lol. Talked about the whole summer. Beginning of the next year he tried to do that whole let's let bygones be bygones and shake hands with the kid he ratted out and got his ass kicked again. What an obnoxious fucking turtle mayo. Baptist Kawalker said all addictions are bad, except for Jesus. We even read a verse that said not to get obsessed about the word of God. This is also the same guy who says his family is always happy. He supported the idea of only making love for procreation. He's had 2 children in 5 years and I've never seen his wife smile. I'd tell him lack of sex in a marriage is a divorce statistic, but what would be the point? Me. I started having intense paranoid and grandiose delusions around 16. Everyone that knew me was in a covert plot to murder me or drive me to suicide. Part of the delusion was that if I talked to anyone at all about it, I would be committed. This was just as good as death as far as my persecutors were concerned, so I kept it bottled and kept quasi-functioning this way for 20 years. When I finally broke and sought help, I lived 1300 miles from my nearest family member. Every few years I would just move farther away. I would eventually become convinced that the people in my current town had gotten involved, and I would bail. I'm now medicated and in therapy. The one good thing that came out of it, it is really hard to scare me now. I have been hospitalized a few times for mental health problems, so I have met a lot of delusional people. One that particularly sticks out in my memory though is a woman who became obsessed with me because she thought I was a character from a TV show who had come out of the TV show to marry her. She would come up to me and tell me the most strange things like how she was talking to my mom who told her we were meant to be together, or that she knew I was sending her live orbs. I'm still not sure what that meant. Sometimes she would just go on a random rant like shouting about how her mother is the president of Canada, made even more strange by the fact that we don't have a president, and her grandmother was Queen Elizabeth, and how she needed the Pope to bring her holy water for a shower. She never believed when I tried explaining to her that I'm not a character from a TV show, and the idea just seemed to frustrate her. At first the nurses seemed to find the whole situation hilarious, but eventually they moved her into a different ward. I still feel bad for her because she must have been dealing with a pretty severe mental illness, but it definitely was not a fun experience. I wouldn't really call her delusional, but she was pretty unreasonable and dumb, so I hope this fits. My 5th and 6th grade homeroom teacher always believed my bullies instead of me when they would bully me, and I'd try and tell on them. She even made a special back row with 3 tables spaced out over the room, and guess who got to sit in the middle most of the time? Yep, me, while both my bullies were sitting in the tables left and right of me and distracted me for most of the years. Once my teacher even went so far as to say I'm the problem child and set me into a special needs group, and boy did she get a slap in the face when proved wrong. My dad was highly against it, but my mom still obliged, and I'm pretty sure she knew I wasn't the problem. Those were the greatest Wednesday in those 3 years from 5th grade to 7th grade. I met some great people in there. Some became friends, some were met, but it was still pretty fun. We do occasionally meet while in the hallways, but all we do is say hi and do small talk sometimes. I don't blame her, my bullies covered it up pretty good, and I still got a fun experience out of that group. I sorta dated a guy once who, if not a pathological liar, was certainly a habitual liar. He could sound really convincing, and he'd done some really amazing things, until you started to add the timelines together. If he'd done everything he claimed to have done, he'd have been 135 years old. He was a hero in every tale he told. He was a MMA master, a crack shot, and a katana expert. He managed to get himself laid off. There was a loophole he could have reasonably exploited to keep himself on the payroll, but he thought he was indispensable to his company. He wasn't. His goodbye email to everyone was a masterclass in Winnie Budford, an epic of how this company will fail without him, and an opus of sour grapes that some people had sucked and fucked their way to keeping their jobs. Yeah, he said that, and said it to a lot of people who had indeed kept their jobs, effectively napalming a lot of professional bridges. Chick named Lorraine, she was at a counseling center I was forced to attend unless I wanted to get expelled. She had a massage table with crystals and claimed that the crystals were warming it up. I asked her why there was a wire going from it to the wall, and she said that it was powering the crystals. She had me touch a plasma globe with her and said that we were sharing magical energy because a current was going to her finger and one was going to my finger. Here's the 2 beautiful cherries on top. I said to her, right, I'm guessing the earth is flat too? And she said it is. My mother is a pediatrician, like a real one, so she assumed, rightfully so, that I was vaccinated. And she said that the vaccines were clouding my brain, preventing me from seeing the truth. We got the whack job bingo. I'm remembering now that when I tried to tell her that vaccines were fine, she said that they were like alcohol, maybe fine in small quantities, but a problem in higher doses, and she said that she can't handle much alcohol, so she can't handle many vaccines. Her explanation was that she was very thin. In reality she was morbidly obese. She repeated the bullshit about vaccines clouding my brain. I threw up my hands and left. I'm not sure if she was on drugs. She was a masseuse before she started working at the counseling center, so she was sure as hell not a doctor. Maybe that's why she got fired from being a masseuse. I sure as hell wouldn't want a delusional old fat lady touching my naked skin while spewing bullshit. Anyway, I don't know her last name. She went by Ms. Lorraine, so yeah. So I never learned if she had a history of drugs due to never having enough info to look her up. Either way, yikes. Recently a lot of people that don't understand why we need to keep social distancing the shutting of places, and why the coronavirus is not a common cold. The sad thing is that it includes family, friends, and coworkers. They don't seem to grasp that they themselves or someone they care about might get affected and even die. Thanks for watching. Here have this adorable kitty for making it to the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe and help the channel grow. 98% of viewers are not subscribed.